As he passed the construction worker, the millionaire was paralyzed to see his pendant. It was the same as... The rising sun painted the sky golden as Jack woke up in his small room at the back of the construction site. Rubbing his sleepy eyes, the 25-year-old stretched and got up from his simple bed, ready for another day of hard work. His muscles still ached from yesterday's effort, but Jack knew he couldn't afford to rest. As a mason hired for the renovation of the imposing Thompson mansion, he needed to make the most of every minute of daylight. As he got ready, Jack instinctively touched the moon-shaped necklace he always wore. He wasn't sure of its origin, but that simple jewel was his most prized possession, a mysterious link to a past he couldn't remember. Orphaned since childhood, Jack had grown up in a shelter for abandoned children, never knowing his real parents. The necklace was the only clue to his origins, although he had long since lost hope of ever unraveling this mystery. With a sigh, the young man tucked the necklace under his shirt and went out for another day of work. The Thompson mansion rose majestically before him, an imposing three-story building with ornate columns and huge windows. It was undoubtedly the most luxurious residence Jack had ever worked on. As he mixed mortar and carried bricks, the mason discreetly observed the comings and goings of the mansion's residents and employees. He was particularly curious to see the owner of the property, the famous businessman Robert Thompson. In his almost 2 months of work, Jack had not yet crossed paths with the magnate personally. It was in the middle of the morning that Robert Thompson finally appeared. The middle-aged businessman came out the front door, impeccably dressed in a grey suit. His greying hair and upright posture emanated an aura of power and authority. Jack tried not to stare blatantly as he continued his work, but he couldn't help noticing the penetrating look Robert gave him as he passed. For a moment, the businessman's eyes widened slightly, as if he had seen something familiar. Robert slowed his pace, observing the young mason more closely. Jack felt a chill down his spine at that scrutiny, not understanding why. But the moment passed quickly, and Robert continued on his way to the waiting limousine. That brief encounter, however, would trigger a series of events that would forever change the lives of Jack and the Thompson family. That night, as he dined alone in his immense office, Robert couldn't get the image of the young mason out of his head. There was something about that boy that was strangely familiar to him, although he couldn't pinpoint what. Maybe it was just his imagination playing tricks, but Robert felt he needed to investigate further. With a sip of whiskey, the businessman leaned back in his chair and let his mind wander to painful memories he had long tried to repress. 23 years ago, his life had been shattered when his 2-year-old son was kidnapped. The police had never found any concrete clues, and the case had ended up being filed as unsolved. The loss had devastated Robert and his wife Sarah, leaving a wound that had never fully healed. Robert got up and walked to a bookshelf, where he picked up a dusty photo frame. In the photo, a smiling little boy proudly held a small moon-shaped necklace, the same necklace Robert had given his son on the day of his birth, as a symbol of the eternal love between father and son. A solitary tear ran down the businessman's face as he stared at the image. Shaking his head to dispel the painful memories, Robert put the photo frame back in its place. He was being foolish to create false hopes based on an imaginary resemblance. His son was dead. It was time to accept that once and for all. With a tired sigh, the businessman returned to his desk to finish reviewing some contracts. The next morning, Jack arrived early at the mansion, eager to get ahead with the work. He was so focused on his job that he didn't notice Robert Thompson approaching. The businessman stopped a few meters away, watching the young mason attentively. There was something in Jack's posture and gestures that seemed strangely familiar to him. It was then that Robert noticed something shining on the boy's neck. His heart raced when he recognized the unmistakable shape of a small moon. It wasn't possible. Or was it? With trembling hands, Robert approached Jack. "Good morning, young man," said the businessman, trying to keep his voice steady. "May I see that necklace you're wearing?" Jack was surprised by the sudden approach from his boss. Hesitantly, he pulled out the chain and showed the moon-shaped pendant. "It's a very beautiful piece," Robert commented, struggling to control his emotion. "Where did you get it?" "Actually, I'm not sure," Jack replied. "I've had this necklace for as long as I can remember. I grew up in an orphanage, and this is the only thing I have from my past." Jack's words hit Robert like a punch to the stomach. Could it be possible? After so many years, could his lost son be here right before his eyes? The businessman felt his legs weaken and had to lean on a nearby pillar. "Are you all right, sir?" asked Jack, concerned about his boss's sudden paleness. Robert took a deep breath, trying to compose himself. "Yes, I'm fine. I just remembered something important." "Jack, isn't it? I'd like to talk to you later if possible. Can you come to my office when you finish your shift?" Confused but not daring to question, Jack nodded. "Of course, sir. I'll be there." Robert walked away quickly, his mind in turmoil. He needed to talk to Sarah immediately and start investigating this incredible possibility. He could hardly believe that after so many years of despair and pain, fate might be offering them a second chance. Meanwhile, oblivious to the emotional storm he had unleashed, Jack returned to work. The day passed slowly, with the young mason anxious and intrigued about what the powerful Robert Thompson might want with him. When the sun began to set, Jack finally finished his shift and headed to the main mansion. He was greeted by William, the austere-looking butler, who led him to Robert's office on the second floor. As he entered the imposing room, decorated with noble wood furniture and expensive paintings, Jack felt completely out of place. Robert was sitting behind a majestic desk with an elegant, middle-aged woman by his side. The businessman gestured for Jack to sit down. "Jack, this is my wife Sarah," Robert introduced. "We'd like to talk to you about something very important." With his heart pounding, the young mason settled into the indicated chair. Robert and Sarah exchanged an emotion-laden look before the businessman began to speak. "Jack, I know this might seem strange, but I need to ask you some questions about your past," said Robert, leaning forward. "You mentioned that you grew up in an orphanage. Do you know anything about how you got there?" Jack frowned, trying to search his earliest memories. "I don't have many memories from before the orphanage," he replied hesitantly. "The nuns told me I was found abandoned in a park when I was about 2 or 3 years old. There was no identification with me, just this necklace." Sarah let out a small sob upon hearing these words, her eyes welling up. Robert held his wife's hand, seeking strength to continue. "Jack, 23 years ago, our 2-year-old son was kidnapped," revealed the businessman, his voice choked with emotion. "We gave him a necklace identical to yours on the day he was born. We never lost hope of finding him, but as the years passed..." The young mason's eyes widened, beginning to understand where this conversation was heading. His heart beat erratically as he tried to assimilate what he was hearing. "You think that I might be..." Jack stammered, unable to complete the sentence. "We don't want to create false hopes," Sarah intervened, her voice gentle. "But the resemblance is too great to ignore. We'd like to do a DNA test if you agree." Jack felt his head spinning. All his life he had dreamed of discovering his origins, of finding a family, and now, suddenly, this possibility was emerging in the most unexpected way possible. I don't know what to say," muttered the young man, stunned. "Of course I agree to the test, but what if it's true? What happens then?" Robert stood up and walked over to Jack, placing a hand on his shoulder. "If it's true, son, you'll finally be home, and we'll do everything possible to make up for all the lost time." In the days that followed, Jack continued working on the construction site, but now under the attentive and hopeful gazes of Robert and Sarah, the couple could barely contain their anxiety as they awaited the result of the DNA test. Finally, after a week that seemed to drag on forever, the envelope with the results arrived. Robert, Sarah, and Jack gathered again in the office, the air heavy with expectation. With trembling hands, Robert opened the envelope and read the contents. His eyes filled with tears, and he looked at Jack with an expression of pure joy. "It's positive," he announced, his voice choked. "Jack, you are our son." The room exploded with emotions. Sarah ran to embrace Jack, sobbing uncontrollably. The young man, stunned and emotional, instinctively returned the hug. Robert joined the two, enveloping them in his strong arms. For several minutes, the newly reunited family remained like this, crying and laughing at the same time, trying to process the magnitude of that moment. 23 years of separation, pain, and uncertainty finally came to an end. When they finally pulled apart, all three had tear-stained faces, but they smiled radiantly. Jack looked at Robert and Sarah, his parents. still not quite believing it. "I always dreamed of this moment," said the young man, his voice trembling, "but I never imagined it could actually happen." "We never lost hope, my son," Sarah replied, caressing Jack's face. "Your father and I always knew, deep in our hearts, that we would find you one day." Robert picked up the old photo frame and handed it to Jack. "This is you at 2 years old, shortly before the kidnapping," he explained. "See the necklace. It's the same one you've always carried." Jack looked at the photo with fascination, recognizing his own features in the smiling little face of the boy. It was surreal to think that that happy child was himself, before fate separated him from his family. "But what happened?" asked Jack. "How was I kidnapped, and why was I abandoned in a park?" Robert sighed heavily. "Unfortunately, we never discovered all the details. The police investigated for months, but the case ended up going cold. We suspect the kidnapping was motivated by money, but something must have gone wrong, and the criminals decided to abandon you. The important thing is that you're back now," added Sarah, holding her son's hand. "And we're going to do everything to make up for these lost years." In the days that followed, Jack's life turned upside down. From a simple mason, he suddenly found himself elevated to the position of heir to a business empire. Robert and Sarah insisted that he move immediately into the mansion, leaving behind the humble room at the back of the construction site. The news of the Thompson family's prodigal son spread quickly through high society and the media. Jack found himself at the center of a storm of attention, with reporters camped out at the mansion gates and his photos plastered on the covers of magazines and newspapers. For the young man, the adaptation was not easy. Accustomed to a simple life and manual labor, Jack felt out of place in the world of luxury and privilege he had suddenly been inserted into. The expensive clothes bothered him, the rules of etiquette confused him, and he found himself missing his old construction site colleagues. Robert and Sarah, eager to make up for lost time, showered their son with attention and pampering. They hired private tutors to help him complete his formal education and gradually introduced him to the family business. Jack strived to meet expectations, but often felt overwhelmed and insecure. One afternoon, about a month after the revelation, Jack was in the mansion's garden contemplating his new life, when William, the butler, approached with a severe expression. "Dinner will be served in an hour, sir," William announced coldly. "I suggest you dress appropriately this time." Jack felt his face burn with shame, remembering last night's dinner when he had come down wearing jeans and a t-shirt, to the horror of the guests present. He nodded silently as the butler walked away with a look of disapproval. Sighing, Jack headed to his new room, a suite larger than the entire apartment he used to live in. As he rummaged through the wardrobe full of expensive suits, he couldn't help but feel a pang of longing for his previous simple life. As he got ready for dinner, Jack reflected on the drastic changes in his life. He was deeply grateful to have found his parents and to be welcomed with so much love, but at the same time, he felt like a fish out of water in this new world. The dinner went off without incident, with Jack striving to use the cutlery correctly and participate in the sophisticated conversation. Robert and Sarah watched him with pride, but the young man couldn't help noticing the disdainful looks William gave him as he served the dishes. After dinner, Robert called Jack to his office. The businessman seemed anxious and a little nervous. "Son, there's something important I need to discuss with you," Robert began. "As you know, Thompson Enterprises is one of the largest companies in the country, and as my heir, it's natural that you assume a leadership role in the future." Jack swallowed hard, feeling the weight of responsibility fall on his shoulders. Robert continued, "I know all of this is new to you, but I believe the time has come to start preparing you to eventually take over the company's presidency." The young man's eyes widened, astonished. "But Dad, I don't know anything about running a company. Until a month ago, I was a simple mason." Robert smiled, understanding. "I know, Jack, and that's why we're going to start slow. Starting next week, you'll begin working part-time at the company, learning about the different departments and operations. You'll also continue with your private lessons to complete your formal education." Jack nodded, still feeling overwhelmed. "I'll do my best, Dad. I promise I won't disappoint you." Robert hugged his son. "I know you won't, son. Your mother and I have complete confidence in you." In the months that followed, Jack found himself immersed in a whirlwind of new experiences and learnings. In the morning, he attended intensive classes with the best private tutors money could buy. In the afternoon, he went to Thompson Enterprises headquarters, where he rotated through various departments, learning about finance, marketing, human resources, and operations. Despite the constant fatigue and pressure, Jack found himself fascinated by the business world. His natural intelligence and dedication helped him quickly absorb new knowledge. Robert proudly observed his son's progress, seeing in him the future of the company he had built. However, not everything was rosy in Jack's new life. While most employees treated him with respect and even adulation, he felt that some saw him as an intruder, a scammer who had appeared out of nowhere to steal the position they believed they deserved. The most vocal of these detractors was William, the butler. Although he always maintained a facade of politeness in front of Robert and Sarah, William did not hide his contempt for Jack when they were alone. "Do you really think you can become a Thompson overnight?" the butler taunted on one occasion when they crossed paths in an empty hallway. "You're nothing but a dirty mason wearing expensive clothes. Soon everyone will see through the farce you are." Jack clenched his fists, struggling to contain his anger. "I am their son, William. The DNA test proved it." William laughed sarcastically. "DNA doesn't make you a Thompson. You'll never truly be one of them." The butler's cruel words echoed in Jack's mind, feeding his own insecurities. No matter how hard he tried, there were moments when the young man wondered if he really belonged in that world. One night, unable to sleep, Jack went out for a walk in the mansion's gardens. He sat on a bench near the fountain, observing the moon's reflection in the water. Unconsciously, his fingers caressed the moon-shaped necklace he always wore. "Can't sleep?" A soft voice surprised him. Jack turned to see his mother, Sarah, approaching. "Just thinking," he replied with a weak smile. Sarah sat down next to her son, putting her arm around his shoulders. "Want to talk about what's bothering you?" Jack hesitated for a moment, but then the words began to flow. He told his mother about his insecurities, the fear of not living up to expectations, William's taunts. Sarah listened attentively, her eyes filling with tears. When Jack finished, she hugged him tightly. "My dear," she said with a choked voice, "you are stronger and more capable than you imagine. To have gone through everything you've been through and still become such a good and dedicated man, that shows how special you are." Jack felt a lump in his throat. "But what if I can't be the heir you expect? What if I disappoint you and the company?" Sarah held her son's face between her hands, looking him in the eyes. "Jack, listen carefully. Your father and I love you unconditionally, no matter what happens with the company or what path you choose to follow in life. What matters is that we're finally together." Those words deeply touched Jack's heart. For the first time since discovering his origins, he truly felt that he belonged to this family. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered, hugging her again. From that night on, Jack found a new determination. He decided he would prove his worth not just to others, but mainly to himself. He dove even deeper into his studies and learning about the company, surprising everyone with his dedication and rapid progress. Months passed, and Jack began to stand out in his roles at Thompson Enterprises. His experience as a mason gave him a unique perspective on the company's operations, especially in the construction sector. He proposed several innovative ideas to improve efficiency and working conditions at construction sites, earning the respect of employees. Robert observed his son's growth with a mixture of pride and admiration. In a board meeting, the businessman announced that Jack would officially assume the position of Vice President of Operations. The news fell like a bomb at the company. While many celebrated the meteoric rise of the young heir, others viewed his rapid promotion with distrust and envy. William, in particular, was furious at the announcement. The butler, who for years had nurtured the hope of one day assuming a prominent position in the company, saw his dreams crumble in the face of Jack's rise. Determined to sabotage the young Thompson's success, William began to plot behind the scenes. Using his years of service and the trust he had gained in the family, the butler began to spread malicious rumors and insinuations about Jack among employees and company contacts. "I heard he can barely read and write," William whispered to one of the directors. "How can someone like that lead a company of this size?" To another, he insinuated, "Don't you find it strange how he appeared out of nowhere? I have my doubts about this lost son story." Slowly, the seeds of distrust began to germinate. Jack noticed that some colleagues began to treat him differently, with suspicious looks and conversations that stopped when he approached. The situation came to a head during an important negotiation with an international client. Jack was leading the sales team in a crucial presentation when, mysteriously, the files on his laptop disappeared moments before the meeting was to begin. Caught off guard and without the necessary material, Jack had to improvise the presentation. Although he managed reasonably well thanks to his knowledge of the project, it was evident that the client was dissatisfied with the lack of professionalism. Devastated by the failure, Jack locked himself in his office, questioning his ability to lead. It was then that he received an unexpected visit from Lisa, his assistant. "Jack," she said hesitantly, "there's something you need to know. I saw William messing with your laptop before the meeting." The revelation hit Jack like lightning. Suddenly, all the small sabotages and accidents of the past few months made sense. Confronted with the truth, Jack felt a mixture of anger and determination ignite within him. Determined to expose William's manipulations, Jack began his own discreet investigation. With the help of Lisa and some loyal employees, he collected evidence of the butler's actions, including compromising emails and security camera footage. Armed with this evidence, Jack finally confronted William in the presence of Robert and Sarah. The butler, cornered, tried to deny the accusations, but the evidence was irrefutable. "How could you, William?" asked Robert, shocked and furious. "After so many years of loyal service—" "Loyal?" William shouted, losing his composure. "I dedicated my life to this family and this company. And for what? To be passed over by this intruder?" Sarah intervened, her voice cold with contained anger. "Jack is our son, William. He has as much right to be here as any of us." "He will never be a true Thompson," William shouted. "He's just a dirty mason who got lucky." Jack, who had been observing the confrontation in silence, finally spoke. "You're right about one thing, William. I was a mason, and that's why I understand the value of hard work and honesty, something you've clearly forgotten." Robert put his hand on his son's shoulder, proud. Turning to William, he said firmly, "You're fired, William. Leave this house immediately." As the former butler was escorted out of the mansion, the Thompson family gathered in a tight embrace. Jack felt a huge weight lift from his shoulders, finally free from William's manipulations. In the months that followed, Jack worked tirelessly to regain the trust of employees and business partners. His honesty, dedication, and natural leadership ability soon won over even the most skeptical. Thompson Enterprises flourished under the joint leadership of Robert and Jack. The father, experienced and strategic, perfectly complemented the son with his innovative ideas and deep understanding of operations on the factory floor. A year after the confrontation with William, the Thompson family held a big party to celebrate Jack's birthday, the first they could commemorate together in 24 years. The mansion was filled with executives, business partners, and friends, all eager to honor the young man who had become a beloved and respected figure. In the middle of the celebration, Robert asked for everyone's attention and made a surprising announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is with immense pride that I officially announce the transition of Thompson Enterprises presidency. Starting next month, my son Jack will assume the position of CEO, while I will act as chairman of the board." The room exploded in applause. Jack, emotional, hugged his father and mother, hardly believing the trust they were placing in him. Later that night, when the party had ended and the mansion had returned to silence, Jack went up to the terrace for a moment of reflection. Looking at the city stretching below, illuminated by the nightlights, he couldn't help but marvel at the incredible journey his life had been, from a lonely orphan to heir of an empire, from mason to CEO, from lost to found. Touching the moon-shaped necklace he never took off, Jack smiled. That small object, which for so long had been his only link to an unknown past, was now the symbol of a bright future full of possibilities. Jack took a deep breath, feeling the night breeze on his face. He knew many challenges still awaited him, but he was ready to face them. With the love of his family and the strength he had discovered within himself, he knew he could overcome any obstacle. At that moment, under the soft glow of the moon, Jack Thompson made a silent promise. He promised to honor his parents' legacy, to take care of the employees who were now under his responsibility, and to use his privileged position to make a difference in the world. The lost boy had finally found his way home, and now as a man, He was ready to build his own destiny. Weeks passed and Jack dove headfirst into his new responsibilities as CEO of Thompson Enterprises. The days were long and exhausting, filled with meetings, crucial decisions, and constant challenges. But the young leader faced everything with a mixture of enthusiasm and determination that inspired everyone around him. One of Jack's first initiatives as CEO was to launch a social responsibility program focused on orphaned children and low-income families. Inspired by his own story, he wanted to use the company's resources to create opportunities for those who, like him once, had nothing. The program, named New Moon Project, offered scholarships, professional training, and psychological support for young people in vulnerable situations. Jack made a point of personally participating in many of the activities, sharing his story and encouraging participants to never give up on their dreams. As the New Moon Project gained media attention and received praise from society, Jack faced his own internal challenges. Despite his apparent success, there were still moments when the insecurities of the past haunted him. One night, after a long day of work, Jack found his father in the mansion's office. Robert immediately noticed that something was bothering his son. "What's worrying you, son?" asked Robert, indicating for Jack to sit down. Jack hesitated for a moment before opening up. "Dad, sometimes I wonder if I really deserve all this, if I'm capable of leading this company that you built with so much effort." Robert smiled understandingly. "Jack, let me tell you something I've never shared with anyone. When I started Thompson Enterprises, I was just an ambitious young man with more dreams than experience. There were countless nights when I wondered if I was up to the challenge." Jack looked at his father, surprised. Robert had always seemed so confident and sure. "The secret," Robert continued, "is not have doubts, but to not let them paralyze you. Every challenge you overcome, every difficult decision you make, makes you stronger and more capable." Robert's words deeply touched Jack. He realized that his journey, though unique, was not so different from his father's. Both had faced adversities and doubts, but persisted. "Thank you, Dad," said Jack, feeling a new sense of determination arise within him. "I promise I'll keep giving my best, not just for myself but for the whole Thompson family and the employees who depend on us." Robert hugged his son, proud. "I know you will, son, and know that your mother and I will always be here to support you." In the following months, Jack channeled this new confidence into his actions as CEO. He implemented innovative changes in the company, focusing on sustainability and employee well-being. His fresh approach and ability to connect with people at all levels of the organization quickly made him an admired and respected leader. The New Moon Project continued to grow, expanding to other cities and impacting thousands of lives. At one of the project's graduation ceremonies, Jack was surprised by a young man who approached him with tears in his eyes. "Mr. Thompson," said the emotional young man, "I wanted to thank you personally. Your story and this project changed my life. I also grew up in an orphanage thinking I'd never have a chance. Now, thanks to you, I'm about to start college." Jack hugged the young man, deeply touched. At that moment, he truly understood the impact his actions could have. It wasn't just about leading a company, but about using that position to make a difference in the world. As time passed, Thompson Enterprises thrived under Jack's leadership. His innovative approach and commitment to social responsibility not only increased the company's profits, but also transformed it into a model of ethical and sustainable business. At home, Jack strengthened his bonds with Robert and Sarah more and more. The wounds of the past, though never completely forgotten, began to heal. The Thompson mansion, once a symbol of loss and pain for the couple, now overflowed with family joy and love. One day, during a family dinner, Sarah surprised Jack with an unexpected question. "Son, have you ever thought about trying to find your adoptive family from the orphanage?" Jack became thoughtful. Amidst all the excitement of the past few years, he had almost forgotten about the nuns and the other children who had been his family for so long. "I think that would be a great idea," he replied after a moment. "They took care of me when I had no one. I'd like to thank them and maybe help the orphanage in some way." With the support of Robert and Sarah, Jack began a search for the orphanage where he had grown up. It wasn't an easy task, as many years had passed and his childhood memories were hazy. But after weeks of investigation, they finally located the place. The orphanage, now run by a new generation of nuns, was still functioning, although facing financial difficulties. When Jack arrived, accompanied by his parents, he was received with surprise and emotion. Sister Mary, one of the few nuns who still remembered little Jack, couldn't hold back her tears when she recognized him. "My God, is it really you, little Jack? Look how you've grown." Jack hugged the nun, feeling a wave of memories and emotions wash over him. "Sister Mary, I came to thank you for everything you did for me, and also to help, if you'll allow me." In the months that followed, Jack worked tirelessly to renovate and improve the orphanage's conditions. Using personal and company resources, he modernized the facilities, hired more staff, and created an education fund to ensure that all children had the opportunity to study. The Orphanage Revitalization Project became a new chapter of the New Moon Project, serving as a model for similar initiatives across the country. Jack made a point of visiting regularly, playing with the children and sharing his story of overcoming adversity. On one of these visits, accompanied by Robert and Sarah, Jack watched the children playing on the new playground that had been built. His heart filled with a mixture of joy and melancholy. "You know," he said, turning to his parents, "for a long time I wondered why all that had happened to me. The kidnapping, the abandonment, the years in the orphanage, it seemed so unfair." Sarah held her son's hand, her eyes watery. Robert put his arm around Jack's shoulders. "But now," Jack continued, "looking at these children, at everything we've managed to accomplish, maybe that was the reason. Maybe I needed to go through all that to be able to be here today, making a difference in their lives." Robert smiled, proud. "Son, you've transformed a tragedy into something beautiful and meaningful. We couldn't be more proud of you." At that moment, surrounded by the love of his parents and the joy of the orphanage children, Jack felt a deep peace. His journey had been long and difficult, but each step had led him exactly where he needed to be. The moon-shaped necklace, which for so long had been a reminder of his mysterious past, now shone on his neck as a symbol of hope and infinite possibilities. Jack knew that no matter what the future held, he would face it with courage, compassion, and the strength of his family's love, both the one of blood and the one he had chosen along the way. As the sun set on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Jack made a silent promise. He promised to continue his mission of creating opportunities for those who, like him once, just needed a chance to shine. For he had learned that sometimes the greatest blessings arise from the most difficult challenges, and that true success is measured not only by personal achievements, but by the positive impact we can have on the lives of others. And so, under the starry sky, with the sound of children's laughter in the background and the love of his family by his side, Jack Thompson knew he was finally home, not just in the luxurious mansion or the company office, but in his heart, where the moon would always shine as a reminder of his extraordinary journey and the promise of an even brighter future.